So that's sometimes. Any of us could be that sometimes, but not all the time. Christ is the example that we look to. I asked you a question when we ended class, and I said we'd start with this question, and somebody's already given me a couple of answers to it. I said we would start with a question of, you know, and all of this study points, and really all of this year points to Jesus. Genesis 1 points to Jesus. Everything we talk about, spoiler alert, Jesus is where we're going and his plan of salvation, right? So that's a lot of things are going to overlap in that. And we've got that complete plan, and we're going to be looking through a lot of that, and a lot of it's going to overlap. But I told you on Sunday, one question that kept coming to my mind is, we don't have any plan. We don't have any plan for if man did not fail. And we don't. But we do know some principles that apply to that, don't we? And I had somebody to give me an answer to that. So if man had not failed, then where would we be now? What would we have now? What? A perfect world, no death. Now what does that mean? What else, Gene? No, no sin, no death. But Gene answered this question Sunday morning. He said, there'd be a lot of old people around. And we just think we're old, but there'd really be a lot of old people. But something else Gene mentioned too. There'd be some businesses that would not be in business. There wouldn't even be these businesses. He just mounted funeral homes. So if you want to be in the funeral home business, there wouldn't be none. But I just think that's interesting to think about that. I mean, it's not something we have to worry about. But that's interesting, I think. And some of the things, but the things that we're talking about help to make us think about those things more keenly, I think. And we'll talk a little bit more about that before too long. The point that we're down to is point 3 in the lesson. The Christ is the Son of God. Now, we're still in Psalm 2, and I know we reference a lot of scriptures throughout this, but they point toward one another like signposts, one pointing one way and one pointing the other. You remember we said on Sunday, some people say this, none of us say this, but some people say, I just don't get anything out of that old Bible. And they're not talking about the Bible as a whole, they're talking about the Old Testament. And we know for a fact that's not true, because almost everything we've looked at has pointed us where? The Old Testament. Right. If we're standing in the Old Testament, it's pointing us in the New. And if we're standing on the New Testament side, it's pointing us back to the Old and showing us the corollary between the two. And that's easy for us to see. Even I can get that. A blind hog get an acorn every now and then, right? That's true. Well, the Christ is the Son of God. But when we return to Psalm 2, we're down to verse 7 through 9. Let's read those and let's talk about them just a little bit. In Psalm chapter 2, beginning in verse 7, it says, I will surely tell of the decree of the Lord. He said to me, Thou art my son. Who said that? God did. Thou art my son. King James used the word, you are my son. Today I have begotten thee. Again, the King James used the word you. God said that as well. Ask of me, and I will surely give the nations as thine inheritance, and the very ends of the earth as thy possessions, or possession. Thou shalt break them with a rod of iron, thou shalt shatter them like earthenware. Now, God, you see, adopted or begotten this chosen one as, like Dwayne said, His king. That's His king. All right? This king that God Himself anoints, He's the anointed one, He'll have more power and more possessions than any other king can imagine, right? Because He is the ultimate God. Verse 9 tells us there about the power and strength of the kings. He tells us about the king's rule. He will break all enemies. Now, you'd have to be a strong king, a strong ruler to do that, wouldn't you? It didn't say some, it said all enemies. Now, in the Old Testament, there are three rods of power. One's called the shepherd's rod, one's the king's scepter, and the other one is the punishment rod. The rod that it's talking about here, in reference to the rod of iron, is probably the king's scepter, because it was made of the strongest metal and it would have the most strength. Do you understand why the anointed one, our king, would have that rod? Because he's the ruler, right? He's the decision maker. Well, what that would mean to us is God's king, which that's who? Who? Christ. He would have His anointed one, His Son, would have complete power and control over the entire earth, right? And most of us don't question that, do we? We believe that, don't we? I see some heads nodding in the affirmative. All right. Let's go to verses 10 through 12, where it says in Psalm 2, "Now therefore, O kings, show discernment." What's another version say for that word there? Wise, wisdom. Now we know that's discernment. I don't think I ever use that word. But we know what wisdom is, don't we? Show wisdom. Take warning, O judges of the earth. Worship the Lord with reverence. What does that word worship mean? To what? Serve Him. That's what I wrote down. To serve Him. But and it means a service. You are a bondservant or a slave to Him. That's what we're supposed to be to Christ. We're supposed to be all in to Christ. It says, "And rejoice with trembling. Do homage." What's another version? Who's got the old King James Version? What's it say there instead of do homage? What does it say? Kiss. Kiss the Son, lest He become angry and you perish in the way. For His wrath may soon be kindled. How, notice the very ending of this ends with a beatitude. It says, "How blessed are all who do what?" My version says, "How blessed are all who do what they want to do." Oh, no, that doesn't say that. It doesn't say that. What does it say? How blessed are all who trust? The New American Standard uses the word take refuge in Him. Do we know what it means? Do we know what it means to trust in or to take refuge in? Have you ever been somewhere or been in such a situation where you were at your wit's end and you needed some place to trust in for your safety? You ever been like that? I was talking to a couple of parents. This was on Monday of this week, and their daughters, 30-something years old. She's got about 3 kids, and she came to them on Monday night, and she's never been one to take their advice at all. But she was at the breaking point. And she made the statement, "My life is a mess, and I don't know how to fix it. Can you help me?" Now, those two parents, and they live in another state. You don't know who they are. But those two parents are standing ready to help her. But her demeanor changed. You know, she was big and bad, and she was a big girl. She wasn't a physically big girl, but she was big enough. You know what I'm saying? She was 3 times 7. She was over 21. She could make her own decision, and that's how all of us are. We are big enough to do whatever we want to do. Oh, but when things come along, then we need a place of refuge, don't we? Do we know where to find it? God can help us, but how are we going to know how God can help us? We're going to look to His Son. That's how we're going to figure that out. We're going to find out what He wants from us because we're going to figure that out by looking at His Son. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. This is a rhetorical question, but what should these nations do that we just read about? What should they do? We just talked about it. We should trust and take refuge. Instead of making up our own rules, right? Or doing what we want to do. Or you remember what we talked about on Sunday? Sometimes it's real easy. If we want to do something that don't meet God's standard or that there's not in agreement with what God wants us to do, we think, and this is just ludicrous thinking, is that somehow or another, if we band together, that's got to make it better. And the more I think about that, I don't watch the news anymore, but even the news that I listen to on the radio, things they talk about, it makes me think about that. I mean, is that how? It's not nice to call people dumb, but is that how dumb that we are? I'm including myself in there. You understand what I mean by that? Our world cannot be that dumb. Let's keep looking at some stuff. Did somebody? It is. Gene said it is. We can take a vote on that, and I'd say it'd probably win. Regardless of power or position, or the sheer amount of goods that we store up, sometimes we can. Sometimes as nations we think that our power lies in the amount of goods that we can store up. They interviewed a man on the radio this morning who had, last week he had 400 acres of corn field underwater. Today he had 500 acres of cornfield underwater right here in this county, and the water's rising at 3 inches a day. So it's not going to take very long. It's still rising. He said, we will not be able to plant corn this year. And then he said, I think he said, I'm 78 years old. It's an act of God, and we'll be okay. He wasn't upset. He said, we've gone through this before in my lifetime. We survived it then. We'll survive it now. That's a good outlook. I hope I can be like that. If in fact any of us, any nation, any people do not recognize God's authority, what's the consequences that it will bring? I wrote 2 words. There's many. What are the consequences? Failure. I didn't write that one, but I like that. Failure. I mean, I don't like failure, but I like it for an answer. Failure. I wrote ruin. Ruin. What else? Destruction. That was the other word I wrote. Those are not, we don't want to be on that side of the ledger. When you look at verse 11, Um, what should the nations do in relation to God, according to verse 11 of Psalm 2? Respect, fear, worship. Worship. So, and not the last word, we're to worship the Lord with what? Reverence. Be a bondservant. I think we mentioned this on Sunday. They're to own Him by submission as their King and their God. That's what we're supposed to do. Own Him as our own. Any comments, questions? Mike? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Right. Right. Mm-hmm. And he had been with the Father. He left that realm for us. We'll talk some more about that in a minute. If we flip over to the New Testament, in John, the first chapter, verse 1, it says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." We've read that before. We can go over to John, the 5th chapter, verse 18. In John, the 5th chapter, verse 18, where it says, "For this cause, therefore, the Jews were seeking all the more to kill him, because he not only was breaking the Sabbath, but also was calling God his own Father, making himself equal with God." Well, when we think about that, think about if the Jews had not failed. By the Jews failing, what does that mean for us? We have a chance for salvation. Exactly. So that was a bad thing that they didn't follow God, but we're the beneficiaries of that. And that's important. Flip on over to John chapter 10, verse 30. In John 10, verse 30, where it says, and this is Jesus speaking, "I and the Father are," how many does it say there? One. Remember we talked about to be a Bible student, you only have to count to one. Look on over to John the 17th chapter. In John the 17th chapter, verse 5, Jesus continues and says, "And now glorify thou me together with thyself, Father, with the glory which I had with thee before the world was." That's what I'm talking about. He left the Father. It's a good thing let me check. It's a good thing I wasn't asked to do that. I won't speak for you. You can answer that question yourself. Look on down in verse 10, 17th chapter, where it says, and all things that are mine are thine, and thine are mine, and I have been glorified in, or some versions use the word by them, in them or by them. Verse 10 tells us that they've come to realize that He's more than a Galilean carpenter. He's what? He's the Son of God. He's God. Those are Jesus' words. Flip over to Romans for just a minute. Let's look at one verse in Romans. Romans chapter 1 and verse 4. Romans chapter 1 and verse 4, and then we're going to come back to John. Romans chapter 1, verse 4. It says, who was declared the Son of God with power by the resurrection from the dead, according to the Spirit of holiness, Jesus Christ our Lord. Now flip back over to John, the 20th chapter. In John 20, verse 30 and 31. John 20, verse 30 and 31. Verse 30 begins, many other signs, therefore, Jesus also performed in the presence of the disciples, which are not written in this book. But these have been written that you may what? That you may believe. That you may believe what? That Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God. And that believing you may have what? Life. That life in His name. That's the wonderful name of Jesus. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, that's right. That's exactly right. Um, I think Jonathan mentioned this in the first class that in the life of class, in the life of Christ class, one of the points, you correct me if I'm wrong, one of the points was that Jesus was either a liar or a lunatic or He was Lord. I'm going to add another one in there. So to make 4 points. Some people think He was a legend. Like Paul Bunyan, or put in another legend that you want to put in there. But He wasn't. He wasn't. He was the Lord. Yeah, Jonathan. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. They're not. That's why I put in legend. Because people today, they think that. Mm-hmm. It is, and I'm going to ask you some questions and get you to think about something here in a minute that hopefully will make us understand that maybe a little bit better. I don't have the words, I don't have the vocabulary, I don't have the knowledge to explain to you how important that is, because it's not just some story. It is a story. It is Jesus' story. The thing we have to keep in our mind is He wants us, all of us, in it. That's what He wants. We can't just look at him and say, oh, that's a nice, because sometimes when we say, oh, that's a story, that makes us, you know, it's not a fairy tale, like you said. It's not a fairy tale. It is a real thing. It's like when we call, I hate to call them Bible characters, because sometimes when we say, well, let's talk about Bible characters. Well, sometimes in our mind, a character in my mind that's going to date me. It's like Fred Flintstone or Barney Rubble. Now, most of you in here know who them two are. But though they're characters, but that's not who these characters are. And we've got to work on our minds to make sure that we know that. Let's go on to point 4. When it talks about Christ is the Son of Man. We'll look at Daniel, the 7th chapter, verse 13 and 14. In Daniel chapter 7, verse 13 and 14, it says, I kept looking in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven, one like a son of man coming. That's Jesus. And he came up to the Ancient of Days. Now, who on earth is the Ancient of Days? Who? It's God. God's the Ancient of Days. And notice one thing in that verse. Back up just a few words there. It says, and he came where? Up. That's ascension. You can look at Acts 1:9. He came up to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion. Dominion, glory, and a kingdom that all the peoples, nations, and men of every language might serve him. His dominion is everlasting dominion, which will not pass away. And his kingdom is one which will not be destroyed. Now, go back to where it says, and to the beginning of verse 14, and to him was given dominion, glory, and a kingdom. What's it talking about? What's it talking about when it says it's given him a kingdom? It's not a trick question. It's the church. It's the church. Acts 2 and 36. It's the church. The purpose, remember this. We've got to keep this in our mind. The purpose of the cross is substitution. That's the whole purpose of the cross. Remember this. I'm a proponent of saying this. I say this a lot. I probably say this to every class I've ever taught. The ground is always level at the foot of the cross. What does that mean to you when I say that? The ground is always level at the foot of the cross. What does it mean? Maybe I'm dumb. We all need mercy, and we're all on the same what? We're all on the same level. We're on the same plan. I'm no better than you, and you're no better than me. We're both, if it was a contest, and God were to say, whoever can jump over the moon, you're going to be saved. Both of us are going to be miserable failures, aren't we? We are. That's just the fact of the matter. Let's look at Isaiah just a minute. We're going to talk about Isaiah a lot in this study this quarter. And probably, my opinion ain't worth nothing, but you can have it for what you paid for it. Isaiah 53 is probably one of the best messianic prophecy passages in the whole Bible. It really is. But let's look at just one verse in Isaiah 53. We'll look at verse 2. Verse 2 says, well, let's back up and let's read 1 too. Who has believed our message? And to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? For he grew up before him like a tender shoot, and like a root out of parched ground. He has no stately form. I want you to listen to what I'm fixing to read. Because what I'm fixing to read, I'm fixing to read you a picture of Jesus. Okay, are you ready? Close your eyes. If you won't close your eyes, close your eyes. Get this picture of who Jesus is. Like a root out of parched ground. Listen to what this says. He has no stately form or majesty. Did you understand what that said? He has no stately form or majesty that we should look upon Him, nor appearance that we should be attracted to Him. He was despised and forsaken of men, and a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. That's our Savior. He is acquainted with grief, and like one from whom men hide their face. He was despised, and we did not esteem Him. So, I don't know. I know you've been in a funeral home before, and you look on the wall, and what's there's always a picture of on the wall in a funeral home? Who? Picture of Jesus. And what does it look like? And a lot of people, I remember growing up, going over to whoever it was, great-granny or whoever's house, and a lot of times there's a picture of Jesus up over there. It's all the same picture. They must just copy them off. It's all the same picture. But it looks like Jesus, I'm not trying to be funny about this, but think about it. It looks like Jesus has been to a beauty salon. That may not be the right word to use in this day and time. They still have beauty salons, whatever they call them. It wasn't a barbershop, but And then some of them had a big ring around the back of his head. Remember that? You ever seen that? I noticed that some of y'all who are a little older than others are really shaking your head. You really remember that. But I remember that. It looked like it had a big dinner plate back there. That's not what Jesus looked like. He didn't look like he'd just come out of a beauty parlor. Because what we just read, that gives us a word picture of it, doesn't it? That gives us a word picture of who Jesus was. But he knew. Why did he know that? What's point 4? Christ is who? The Son of Man. What does that mean for us? Did you know that no one guards the tomb where Jesus was? No one guards it. Why? There ain't nobody there. Now, I wrote down 3 other religious leaders in the world. You ever heard of Confucius? He's there. What about Muhammad? There. What about Buddha? There. He was the Son of Man. What does that mean? What does that mean that Jesus was the Son of Man? What does that mean to us? He's our Redeemer. Based on the things we read, what does He know what we're going through? He's like us. He's not just similar to us. He's exactly like us. I want you to think about something. Turn back over to the New Testament, Luke chapter 2. We don't have time to read all this, but everybody in here knows this story. In Luke chapter 2, beginning in verse 41. In Luke chapter 2, beginning in verse 41. You remember this story? You remember the story? What was the story? Where did Jesus' parents go every year? Jerusalem. Why'd they go there? Passover. Man, y'all done good. Y'all doing good. There's going to be a test later. No, not really. Yeah, the festival of Passover. And in Luke 2, Jesus was 12 years old, wasn't he? You remember what happened? They left him. Now, I'm going to tell you, I don't understand that. I mean, especially his mom. I blame his mom a lot on that. She was entrusted with the Son of God. Left him behind. They didn't even know it. And what, 2 or 3 days later, where'd they find him? They went back to Jerusalem once they figured out, hey, we've lost him. He was in the temple courts, yeah. But you remember what he was doing? What was he doing? Who was he sitting with? The Jewish teachers. Yeah. He was listening, learning, asking questions. And they must have been asking him questions too. Because they were amazed at how he answered. I want you to think about some of the questions that they asked. We're not told that, but let's think about it. Here's a 12-year-old boy. He's the Son of God. Now, they may not realize that. Well, they probably don't. But they're amazed at what he knows. But one question that I think they might have asked him, I don't know. We can ask when we get to heaven what they ask. What if any of them ask, how old are you? Can you imagine them asking him that? Is that valid? Is that a valid question? Just how, I don't know how tall he was. Just how old were you? Or how old are you? And we'd probably be looking down at, like, who do you think, how old are you? Listen to his answers. Now, these answers are not told in that story, but they're told to us in the Bible. Okay? How old are you? Well, that's a difficult question to answer, but he's going to answer it. On his mother's side, he's 12 years old. But on my father's side, I'm older than my mother, and I'm just as old as my father. On my mother's side, I get thirsty. But on my father's side, I'm the water of life. On my mother's side, I get hungry. But on my father's side, I took a little fellow's lunch and fed 5,000. On my mother's side, I was homeless. But on my father's side, I owned the cattle on 1,000 hills. On my mother's side, I wept at Lazarus' grave. That's on my mother's side. But on my father's side, I said, Lazarus, come forth. And he did. That's who Jesus is. That's who Jesus is. You see, by those things that the Bible teaches us, He knows exactly what we've gone through. He knows exactly what we're going to go through. And at the same time, He is still God. So when He says, Lazarus, come forth, it happens. That's who Jesus is. John's Gospel tells us He is the what? He is the great what? He is the great I am. You know what it didn't say? I love to look at what things didn't say. It did not say, I was the great I was. It didn't say that. He's the great I am. That's important to us. The Son of Man coming in the clouds tells us He was deity, riding on the clouds in Psalm 97:2, Psalm 104 verse 3, Isaiah 19:1, Nahum 1:3. But not only deity, He was human. He was human. He was God this may be a kooky way to put this. He was God on foot. Does that make sense? That's how He knows what we've gone through. That's how He knows what we're going to go through. Because that's who He was. Any comments, questions up there? Uh-huh. Oh, yeah. No, that's true. But we have to understand that He was God 100%. And He was man 100%. The only exception is that He was sinless. That's something we can't relate to. It doesn't seem possible. But He could. But if He hadn't been, if He hadn't been sinless, is there any reason for us to be here tonight? Nope, not really. Because if He hadn't been sinless, He wouldn't have been able to take our sins on Him. He wouldn't have been the perfect sacrifice. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that still goes on today. It's no different. A lot of the things that we talk about, they still are applicable today. If we look at Christ being the Creator in Psalm 102, verse 25 through 27, we don't have but a minute or two here, but in Psalm 102, verse 25, it says, "The of old thou didst found the earth, and the heavens are the work of thy hands. Even they will perish, but thou dost endure. And all of them will wear out like a garment, like clothing. Thou wilt change them, and they will be changed. But thou art the same, and thy years will not come to an end." That's Jesus. That's Jesus Christ, the Creator. Everything will perish, but He will not. He will be forever. Remember, Jesus is eternal. Remember, He created. He was not created. He was the Creator. You know, angels had a beginning, and angels were created, not Jesus. Uh, Class is over. Grant will pick up with lesson 3 on Sunday morning. Appreciate y'all's comments and questions.